another particular network. And when they came in, the messages looked like that. Just a jumble of letters. Except because the letter on an Enigma machine can encipher itself, if you look at that letter L, you know the original German letter had to be one of the other 25 letters, it couldn't be L. You might think that is quite insignificant, but in fact it was absolutely essential to shortening the problems that the code breakers had. Now, the basis of the bomb was what was known here as a crib, which was an informed guess at what part of the original German said in the message. And as they began to understand the various networks, they then began to be able to guess what part of the message said. So if you knew where a message had come from and where it was going to by direction finding, if you knew the call sign of the person sending and receiving was the same, the length of the message, the time of day, you might be able to guess what part of the message said. Now, among important messages that were enciphered on the Enigma machine were weather messages. Weather is very important in military operations, and it's before the days of satellites. And so the German High Command needed to know what weather conditions were like in the Atlantic, what they were like on the Eastern Front, and various other theatres of war. So you might have a word that said Wettervorhersage, which is weather forecast. And what the code breakers would do is that they would take the particular piece of ciphertext and they would run the crib underneath. Because what they were looking for was the start position of the crib. What letter had enciphered when the letter W was tapped out by the German operator on his machine. So if we put it at the beginning there, we can see that W would go to F, E would go to W, and oops, T would go to T, not possible. So that's why that was important, because that told Bletchley Park that that could not be the starting position of the message. So you might move it down a little bit further, and then you would find that R and R was clashing. So what that did, that fault on the machine, it eliminated particular start positions for the message. So you might move it down to there, where along the section of the crib, no letter above and below is the same. There's a slight problem with that, as we know to our cost here, because we have to break a lot of messages on this machine, is that particular theory could apply in 20 different places in the message. Which one of the 20 was it? Had you got the right crib, and had you got it for the right message? Apart from that, it was all pretty straightforward and simple. So what you would look at is that when the operator on this particular network did Wettervorhersage, on this network it would be at the beginning of the message. So you might then assume that that was the correct position. But when he tapped out W, it moved to Y. When he did E, it went to A, and etc. And this would then be drawn up in diagrammatic form and was known as a menu. Now, at the beginning of the war, by the end of 1940, there were only 2 of these machines in existence. By the end of the war, there were 211. They weren't here, they were mainly in 2 large bomb and blast-proof buildings at East Coast and Stanmore, about 30 miles away. And some of them were in 3 villages not far from where we are now. And in the United States, the Americans built 121 machines. So this was an Anglo-American operation, and it was code-breaking on an industrial scale. So, what does this machine actually do? Well, I'll tell you what it doesn't do. It doesn't do calculations. It is not a computer. It is electromechanical, and it does electrical testings. And what you do on the back of the machine is you electrically connect the German letter with its enciphered letter. So you would electrically connect W to Y, E to A, etc., etc. And if you look on the front of the machine, you will see these coloured drums. Now, on an Enigma wheel, each wheel was wired internally with letters of the alphabet, and each one was wired differently. So in order to distinguish one rotor from another, they stamped a Roman numeral on the back, so that when the German operator was putting the rotors in his machine, he knew he was putting the right wheel in on the left-hand side, the right one in the middle, and the right one on the right-hand side. The colour coding of these drums replicates that system. If you look at this top row of drums, you notice they're all coloured red. And internally, inside each of those drums, are wiring of the letters of the alphabet exactly the same as wheel number 1 on an Enigma machine. And if you look in this direction, you will see that's a set of 3. That is one Enigma machine. So you've got 12 Enigma machines running in one wheel order, 1, 3 and 5. On the middle here, you've got another 12 Enigma machines in another wheel order, 2, 5 and 3. And on the bottom, 2, 4 and 1. In other words, one bomb can look for a break in the message using 3 different wheel orders. But because they used 3 wheels from a box of 5, it meant there were 60 possible wheel orders. And the one bomb can only run 3 different wheel orders. However, there were ways of bringing that down to more manageable proportions, perhaps down to 9, 12, or something of that order. The German Navy was much more security conscious, and enciphered their messages in a more complicated way, and in addition they had 3 extra wheels. So they had 8 wheels, in which they chose 3, so there were 336 possible wheel orders. So you can see the size of the problem in which Bletchley Park was faced. So when the bomb is running, it is running at 26 by 26 by 26 by 36. It is doing some 600,000 electrical tests per second. So it may look a clapped-out old 70-year-old beast, but it was a very, very sophisticated, very clever machine for its day. This is a rebuild. It took 12 years to rebuild. There are no originals left at all. And this is a working bomb. This actually does the job. And we, from time to time, do challenges with GCHQ. We're all just grown-up schoolboys here. I'm supposed to be a 17-year-old Red, so use your imagination. These machines were operated by ladies from the Women's Royal Naval Service. About 1,600 of them worked on 3 8-hour shifts, and there were some 263 engineers who had been drafted into the Royal Air Force. These machines worked round the clock. They were in bays of 10 and 12. It was a non-stop operation. If a bomb broke down, it had to be repaired immediately. So, what does the bomb do? As Frank explained, on the front of the machine there is a plug board, and 10 pairs of letters are plugged together. There's a plug at each end of each one of them. So you plug one letter into one, you plug one end into one letter, and the other end into another letter, and they are then electrically connected. So there were 20 out of the 26 letters connected up in that way. What the bomb does, it looks for one of those pairs. Now it does that by a simple method of looking for what's called an input letter. If you look at this here, the input letter is the letter G, which is what we're running here today. This is the menu we're running today. And you will see that the letter G appears in several places in the menu. In other words, it's a strong letter in the menu. What we do with that is we take one of the cables on the back and we take it from the letter G and we put it into one of 4 chains. And at this end, where you see the 4 chains, at this end of the machine, we open up, where are we? We open up on chain 1 letter. We've opened up the letter A. And what we have said is we believe that on the original German machine, the letter G was plugged to the letter A. Then you will notice that sitting outside these 36 drums are these 3 gold and black drums. And you'll see there's a little pointer, and at each pointer it's at the letter Z. And we start at Z, 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 G to A. The reason we do that is that if you set up an Enigma machine at Z, 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 and you depress the keyboard, it will move to Z, Z, A. And we do exactly the same. we know it's not ZZZ, and the chances of it being G to A is remote. But this machine was designed by mathematicians, and what it does is it ignores all false assumptions. In other words, if it doesn't like G to A, it will just ignore it. Then the machine runs, and when it stops, it does two things. It will stop at 3 letters here. Those 3 letters are the stop letters. And in the little window here, you can see on the side here, there is a little bezel that will drop and will tell us what for that stop G is plugged to. So it might be plugged to K, it might be plugged to L, it might be plugged to anything. We don't know. Now the machine is not infallible. When it stops, we have to check the answer. So the stop letters and the plug hole pair, we then go over to the checking machine, which is behind there. And these checking machines were also manned by wrens. And one of the reasons this is drawn up in diagrammatic form is the first thing we want to do is to confirm the loop. So if the stop says G is plugged to V, and we go around here and we find that A is plugged to V, we know we've got a wrong stop because the letter V cannot be plugged to 2 letters on the Enigma machine. So, but if we come back to G and it gives us V again, it looks like a good stop. It's not 100% certain it's the correct stop, but it's pretty, but you can be fairly safe that it is a correct stop. What then happens is that when you get a correct stop, the information goes back to the coding room. What the bomb does, it finds part of the key. As you go round the loop here, it will give you the other plug hole pairs. It will tell you what E is plugged to, what V is plugged to, etc. So out of the 10, it might give you 7 or 8 of the plug hole pairs. So there's still a bit of the message to be found. There's 2 of the plug hole or stecker pairs, as they use the German name, to be found. The ring setting on the wheels and the wheel starting position, so you've still got some work to do. That information from the bomb goes back to the code. Now, at Bletchley Park, the huts here worked in pairs. 6 did code breaking for Army and Air Force, and in fact railways as well, because they used Enigma. And Hut 3 did the intelligence, and 8 did naval code breaking, and 4 did the intelligence. So it goes back to the code room, and using a hand method that can take anywhere between half an hour and an hour, they will be able to get out the rest of the key of the day. So now they've got the setup of the machine exactly as the original German operator. That would then go to the decoding room where there was that machine that you see in the far corner. That's a British cipher machine called the Type X. That has been modified to work like an Enigma machine. And that one actually does, that is a working machine. And that machine in the corner does exactly the same as the one that was demonstrated by Frank a little earlier. The first message that had come out that day on that key would be tapped out on that Type X machine. You will see it's got 2 drums with 2 tapes. The tape on the left will repeat what you're typing out on the keyboard. So in other words, it's a cipher, and if you've got everything right, the tape on the right will give you the original German. That was then put on what was called a WT red form, and that would then go to the intelligence hub. When it got there, it would be looked at by linguists, and they would put the message into English, but bear in mind that you are looking at German military language. You're not looking at going into a restaurant and ordering a cup of tea or something like that. So you might see 4 letters together, PZGR. You see PZGR, you think you've got something's wrong with the message. But in fact, that was German military language for Panzergrenadier Regiment. So if you know your military language, you know PZGR is Panzergrenadier, so you know that the message, in fact, is broken down into original German. So that would then be assessed by the intelligence officers for its value. Many messages on Enigma were quite mundane and of not little importance. Some of them were crucial, such as the movement of infantry and tank regiments on various fronts, particularly after D-Day. And then that message would have to be got to the commanding generals in the field, to those officers who were in the know about Bletchley Park. Sometimes there were discussions and disagreements among military commanders, because those in the know about what was called ultra would be taking decisions based upon the decodes, but of course other generals were not in the secret, so they didn't know why a certain decision was being taken. There was a golden rule about the information received by people like Bombe, who were in the know, and Patton, the American general, and people like that. They were not allowed to take any military decision based upon ultra alone. They had to disguise it. So, for example, they were reading Rommel's messages that were coming to him from Rome, from the main headquarters in Rome, telling him when his next supply ships would be leaving the Italian ports for Benghazi or Tunisia or wherever he had to be at the time. And what would happen on the Allied side is, once the message had been broken and we knew when the convoy was going to leave, where it was going to leave from, how many ships there were, and indeed what it contained, they would send up the RAF to do reconnaissance, and surprise, one of the RAF planes would spot the convoy, but crucially the convoy would spot the RAF, so that when the convoy was attacked, it would be put down to reconnaissance and not to code breaking. And that, throughout the war, that is exactly what they did. Interestingly, the Germans were breaking the lower middle grade codes of British and Allied ciphers and codes, but they made a horrendous mistake in that when they broke them, they would send the message exactly as it had been enciphered by ourselves into an Enigma message. The Enigma message would be read and gave away the fact that they were reading some of our code books. So that's a simple mistake that they made. During the course of the Second World War, these machines broke 2.5 million Enigma enciphered messages, and it has been said that as a result of the work here, the Second World War may well have been shortened by up to 2 years. So it was a tremendous operation. And what we're going to do now is we're going to shut up and run the machine. When the course run does a full circuit, it clicks on one, but then it does 26 seconds on one, like an Enigma machine. So this bottom row very rarely moves. In fact, on an Enigma machine, you had to key in 676 letters before the left-hand wheel would move. Okay, it's now stopped. Remember, we started at ZZZ. It's now gone to S, to N, and to Y. We said G was plugged to A.
Delta.
It's now saying G is plugged to D. So you see, it's given us an answer, but we don't know if that's correct, so you have to go through the checking process. Meanwhile, the wren on the bomb would run to the next stop, and so on. If you've got everything correct, you would normally expect to get a good stop around about every third, fourth or fifth stop on the machine. Sometimes, as we found to our cost, the bomb will run through and only stop once. So you have to put your fingers crossed that this is the right stop, otherwise there's something wrong. And then of course 24 hours later, the setting of the Enigma machine on that key would change. So you had to start again. It was a never-ending daily grind. So that's roughly how, in short terms, how the system operated. There were, on any given day during the Second World War, anything between 50 and 70 different keys. For example, there were different keys used on the Eastern Front than there were in North Africa. In the Balkans, they were different to Norway, and they were different again in France. So there was a continual battle to try to keep up with the daily changes on the Enigma machine. So the job was never simple. It was always extremely difficult. And there were many, during the course of the Second World War, particularly later in the war, the Germans made further security improvements to the Enigma machine by making certain changes, and each time the people of Bletchley Park had to overcome the new security system. So it was a continual battle to stay up with what was going on, because the Enigma was a tactical machine and you needed to break it within a 24-hour period, otherwise the information contained in it was out of date. Sometimes they could break it within a few hours, sometimes it might take a day, sometimes 3 or 4 days, sometimes they couldn't break it at all. They had to go to a special section to find out why. So day in, day out, it was one enormous mental struggle to break into these keys. Has anybody got any questions? Good, I'll go home now.
What time of the day did they change the code change? Was it always in the morning, 12 o'clock at night, or was it?
The Army and the Air Force changed them at midnight. From 1942, the German Navy changed them at midday. Sometimes the midnight ones will be changed at 2 in the morning. There were occasions when they couldn't break a key and could break a message and they wondered why. It was because at 2 o'clock in the morning, the Luftwaffe in, say, France, was still using the previous day's key. So you had, it was never dead simple, but in broad terms, they did it at midnight and the Navy did it at midday.
They never realised that